and was inducted into the Australian Franchise Association Hall of Fame. Tom had been on multiple private and government boards, including the AFL Commissioner. Today, he's back in the pizza game. He also owns bakeries and donut shops. So let's give a warm welcome to Tom Potter.
You can give me a warm round of applause now if you want. Thanks for waiting all day. My story starts with my father. He actually was a farmer, and the family had a cannery in country Victoria, in Bendigo. And Dad took over the business from his father and his father before that. But at the ripe old age of 42, Dad came home and explained to the family that the business had gone under. We hadn't gone bankrupt, but they'd pretty much lost everything and he had to start over. Over the next 6 months, or a bit longer than that, I think he went through what would be known in modern days times as a breakdown, but eventually bounced out of bed, sat down with the family, and I was 11 years old, and he explained to the family that we were going back into small business and we were moving from Bendigo and we were going to a town called Beechworth. Now immediately myself and my twin brother were excited. First of all, we'd never seen the beach, and we'd got in the car and we drove 2.5 hours from Bendigo, and the further we went, the more we realised that we were nowhere near the beach. And as we went up the mountain and it said Beechworth population 2,500, Dad turned around to us and said, guys, we're going to be the third largest business in Beechworth, the third largest employer in Beechworth, I should say. We got to the brewery, a little soft drink factory, and we had 9 employees. The second largest employer was the mental hospital, and the largest employer was the jail. And that was it for the whole of Beechworth. And what was interesting about that particular town was they had to entirely reinvent themselves over the next 40 years when those 2 big employers were actually closed down. So if you're a farmer, you need good weather. If you're in the soft drink industry, you need good summers. Well, Dad went the next 2 summers that lasted about 8 weeks, and things got worse and worse and worse. And I distinctly remember getting in the car as a kid and driving down to Bendigo, and Dad having to borrow money off my grandfather and get bags of cash and come back so we could make the payroll. And things were tough. And in the second summer that we were there, I was working on the trucks. We'd get up at 4 o'clock in the morning and we'd head out to the Riverina to deliver the soft drinks. And Dad came out with this big box of gifts, and they were all individually wrapped and made for each and every one of our customers. And he said to me, when you get to the pub in Chiltern or the milk bar up in Griffith, go up and personally introduce yourself to these customers and give them their gifts and thank them for doing business with us. It was Christmas. And I remember getting to one of the guys and I handed him this gift, and he opened it up and his face lit up like a Christmas tree. And what Dad had done is he'd got a personally autographed book from Ron Barassi to give to this guy because this guy was a mad AFL fan. And every one of these gifts was individual. And when I got home that night, Dad said, how did it all go? And I said, oh, pretty good. And he said, do you know why we give out these gifts to our customers? And I said, oh, because it's Christmas. And he said, no. He said, in small business, you eat what you kill and you've got to go hunting every day. And he said, we can't compete with Coke and Tarax and Schweppes. We've got to do things completely differently. And that's why we went out and did what we could with those customers to keep them. And the business went on to become quite successful for Dad over the years. When I was 15, I think I was lucky. I was one of the lucky people that I knew what I wanted to do for the rest of my life. And some people can get to the age of 50 or 60 and still not be sure what they want to do when they grow up. But I wanted to work in food. And there was an apprenticeship advertised at a bakery in Albury-Wodonga, which is a town about 30 k's away. I hitchhiked across, I applied for the job, and somehow I got it. My parents allowed me to leave home, and I started my apprenticeship the following Sunday. And I went into the bakery, and there was an oven about as big as this room. It was an industrial bakery. And my job was to stack 11,000 bread tins onto a conveyor, watch them go around for the next 4 hours, and then stack them back up again. And that's what I did every day for about the first 2.5 years of that apprenticeship. Occasionally they'd let you come up and work in the front of the factory. But it was, for me, I think the greatest thing that happened to me in the early days was the worst job was the first job. Everything after that, it just got better. About 6 months before I finished my apprenticeship, I got scouted by the AFL and they asked me to come to Melbourne and try out to have a run down there. I said no because I needed to finish my apprenticeship. 6 months later, I finished my apprenticeship. They called me in the office, congratulated me and sacked me right there on the spot. I called the team in Melbourne and asked them if I could come down, and they said, look, you've missed the cut. You'll have to consider next year, but if you've got some legs to travel, why don't you go to the Northern Territory and play football seasons back to back? So I jumped on a bus and I arrived in Alice Springs a couple of days later, and I started playing footy in Alice Springs. And one of the guys at the football club said to me one day, he said, Tom, what do you do for a living? Do you have a job? And I said, no, I'm just here playing football and I drive tourist buses on the weekend. And he said, but do you have a trade? And I said, well, yeah, I'm a baker. And he got excited and he said to me, you know, there's a bakery here in Alice Springs in the shopping mall and it's for sale. It went broke. Maybe you and I should go in business. And I said, oh, what do you do? And he said, I'm a motor mechanic. And he was your typical motor mechanic with your filthy fingernails and your non-matching thongs and his arse crack hanging out. So we went off to the bank and we applied for our business loan to open up our business. First bank, second bank, third bank, and we couldn't understand why they wouldn't give us any money. At football training one night, a guy pulls up and he's got a brand new car. And everybody huddles around a brand new car. And the first question was, how'd you get the car? And he said, oh, I just went to the bank and convinced them I had a full-time job. And we sat back and thought, well, that's not a bad idea. If we can just convince the bank that we've got full-time jobs, we can get business loans. So we went home and had the phone hooked up and we went to a bank that we hadn't approached for a loan and we sat and we waited for the phone to call and then we gave each other references for jobs that we didn't have, for a business we were going to buy, for money that we were never going to get otherwise. It's kind of funny, but when you look at the approach you take to things when you're young as to a bit older, we will naturally get conservative as we get older. It's just the way we are. But business doesn't, and our ability to want to go and get things shouldn't be any different. So we opened up the business, and I think the first 2 weeks was doing about $4 or $5 grand a week, and I was doing all the pies out the back, and my partner was working out the front. And then business got better and better and better, and I was riding my push bike to work because what we'd done is we'd got the car loans, we'd bought the cars, we'd driven off the lot, we drove to the other side of Alice Springs, we sold them for cash, we got the cash, we walked back, bought the business, got our push bikes, rode home. You follow me so far? So the bank manager walks in about 4 months after we opened the business, and you don't have suppliers here, you don't have banks in the room? No, yeah, they sneak in with the humans. Anyway, bank manager comes in and I'm standing at the front of the bakery unloading these pies. And when you deal with banks, you know that when they loan you money eventually, they carry on like they've done you a personal favour, when in reality, they're banks, you know, the second lowest form of life. Anyway, I'm standing there at the front counter and I'm pulling these pies out and the bank manager leans on the till. And this is the guy that's loaned me the money for the car that I never had, for the job that I never had, for the business that I'm supposed to be working in and so forth. He doesn't understand the web and he yells out across the bakery as he's leaning on the till, "Hey Tommy, how's that car of yours going?" And I said, "It's pretty good, you're leaning on the steering wheel." And he looked back at me and I went back to my partner and I said, "It's probably time we paid out those loans." But I think for me the lesson early on was we never at one stage considered we weren't going to get the money. It was just a matter of how we were going to get it. And that was how we got out of bed every day. About 1.5 years later, things started falling apart with my family and I decided to head back down to Victoria. And I contacted the team in Melbourne and they said, "Yes, you're welcome to come down and do the pre-season." I did the pre-season and the coach called me in, assistant coach, called me in and he said, "I've got good news and bad news about your career with the AFL." And I said, "Oh, what is it?" And he said, "The good news is you've trained hard, you turned up early, you worked late, you've improved your skills, everybody likes you, you're a hell of a clubman, you're a funny bastard, you tell good jokes, we like having you here. And I said, terrific. And he said, the bad news is you're never going to play AFL football. And I said, well, why is that? And he goes, just a complete lack of talent. And he totally smashed me right there on the spot. But the funny thing is, I got up and I walked out and I thought, you know what? I don't know if I really wanted to go down that road, and I really wanted to get back into what I was doing, and that was working back in the food game. And I went to work for Australia's largest company. Now, this is back in the 80s, so it's a bit hard for most people to remember. But I'll tell you a quick story, and I'll give you a prize if you actually guess this. Normally, women get this, so there's not too many of you in the room, but you might get it. And by the way, this is a book I wrote a few years back. It's a bestseller. It's called The Eagle Boy Story. And in Australia, if you sell 10,000 books, it becomes a bestseller. In 2010, I printed 10,000 of these. And in January 2011, the floods came through and washed them all down the Brisbane River. So I rang my distributor and I said, I need another 10,000. And she said, holy shit, you got a bestseller. So who was Australia's biggest company in the 80s?
Myer.
Ooh. Who said Myer? You know, he's right. Coles Myer was Australia's biggest company. BHP almost was, so I'll give you a bestseller after this show. I went to work for Coles Myer, and back in the 80s, you wouldn't walk into a supermarket and see a bakery. They didn't exist. And these guys were putting together bakeries in the backs of supermarkets. And you hear these words that are, I find fascinating. Have you heard that latest word? They call it, I'm a disruptor. What a load of bullshit. I mean, the world and business is being disrupted forever. There's a bunch of kids out at Ormiston School I was talking to a few months back, and I said to them, who was Australia's most successful business retailers 100 years ago? And one of the kids goes, Blockbuster. And I said, no, 100 years ago. And they go, Video Easy. I said, 100 years ago, Australia's biggest and most successful retailers were the guys that sold hats and saddles. And they got disrupted. Everything continues to change. So I went into an environment where we were building these bakeries in the back of supermarkets and people came pouring in and they loved it. And it's not because the product was any better than the bakery out in the street. It was more convenient. When mum was walking through a supermarket with 2 or 3 kids with a trolley, what was most convenient for her was that, oh, the supermarket now supplied the bread that I need. Whatever we do, whenever we sell, we actually have to look at the first question the customer wants, or even ask them, what is it you want? What's the thing that drives the sale? What is it that I'm going to have to do for you to sign on the dotted line? And for me, that was obvious. The bakery was out there in the street, or even in the area where the mum would have to get out of the car and the kids could get run over by a car. So in the supermarket, they were basing the disruption on safety. It was as simple as that. In the middle of working for Coles Myer, I went back and studied flour milling and food technology, and I got a phone call from a company called Defiance Milling, who were a reasonably well-known flour milling company here in Queensland. Now, I'm living in Melbourne, and this is how the phone call went. Tom, we've got a job for you. We would like you to come in and head up our technical services in South Australia. And there's dead silence on the other end of the phone. We'd like you to move to Adelaide. Now, for those of you that grew up in Victoria and you love Victoria and you love your footy, when someone offers you a job in Adelaide, you're just not that excited. Now, recently, I Googled what's happening in Adelaide because I was taking my son over there, and I pressed it 3 times, and there's still nothing happening in Adelaide. And I take the job and I get to South Australia, and South Australians are hilarious. They're like the French of Europe. They hate everybody else. They're really well balanced. They've got a chip on both shoulders, but they're entrepreneurs. And what I found about the South Australians is, and I really enjoyed this environment, was that they had a real FU approach to everybody else. They were bigger, they were better, they knew how to do it. In a lot of cases, they were really quite creative because they were the smaller, angrier player. You know, the whole concept of the small angry dog backing him into a corner. And it was in this environment that a guy called me into his office and he said to me he was going to build a chain of pizza shops around Australia. And he introduced himself as an entrepreneur, which I'd never heard before. And he said, can you help develop my factory and design the factory and the product? And over the next few months, that's exactly what I did. And he started producing massive amounts of pizzas, delivering them out in trucks to these little hole-in-the-wall shops. And the business started to take off pretty well. He then tapped me on the shoulder and said, I'd like you to move to Sydney and come and work for me. And so I left the flour milling industry and I went to what was known as the franchising and fast food industry. The first half a dozen franchises opened in Sydney and they were an instant failure. We'd taken a business model that worked extremely well in Adelaide and we took it into a city that was 5 times the size and it made no penetration. It was like throwing a pebble into the ocean. Franchisees were desperate, weren't making any money, they put their life savings in and things were tough. The boss flies into the Sydney airport and I rang him and said, I need to meet you straight away. I got out there and I started explaining to him that the franchisees were in trouble. And he said to me, what's going on? And I said, we're not getting the sales, we're not getting the traction, it's just not working. And he started yelling at me and explaining to me that they weren't doing the job properly and that they weren't taking responsibility and so forth. And in the middle of this argument, I said to him, no, you're wrong. We've got to fix this problem. Because all I could see with these struggling franchisees was my dad 10 years earlier and the struggles that he went through. Anyway, as he went to step around me to go and catch the next plane to get out of there because he wasn't interested in dealing with any of these problems, I stepped in and I said, you're not getting on that aeroplane until I get some answers on what I've got to do to fix this. Now, I don't know if anybody here has ever got into a shoving match with their boss, but it's just not a good career move. So in the next 30 seconds, I was relieved of my job, sacked. He took the keys off me and said, you're out of here. I went back to the house that I was sharing with 3 other guys in Balmain, and my mate walked past and said, what are you up to? And I said, and he was driving a tradies ute, and he said to me, what are you up to? And I said, I just got sacked again. And he said, what are you going to do? I said, I'm going to catch the train down to Albury tonight and catch up with Mum. And he said, mate, I got that old 69 Peugeot I've been doing up in the driveway. It's got all those different coloured panels on it. It looks like hell, but it drives well. Here's the keys, just take it for a week or 2. So I got in the car, I'm heading down the Hume. It's about an hour and a half out of Goulburn. It's the middle of winter. And I realised that the heater wasn't working in this car. And about an hour out of Goulburn, a truck goes past and throws up a half a brick. And it hits the windscreen, and I swerve and I go off the side of the road. And it was one of those windscreens that shatters. So I had to get out and punch it all in. And I get back in the car and I'm driving into Goulburn for an hour in the freezing cold. Is anybody here from Goulburn? Yeah, okay, right. Yeah. So yeah, if you want to explain what Goulburn's like in the middle of winter, it's as cold as a mother-in-law's kiss. Anyway, just as I get into Goulburn, I pull in at the truck stop and I'm shaking uncontrollably. I'm trying to work out how I'm going to get a windscreen fixed in a 1969 Peugeot. It's freezing cold. And I look across in the magazine rack. I'm surrounded by truckies who are all pulling up and doing what they're doing. And here's a magazine, and that was a magazine called Business Review Weekly. Does anybody ever remember that? They got disrupted. And on the front page of the Business Review Weekly, it had the headline, Entrepreneurs of the Year in that year in Australia. And there's a photograph of this guy that had just sacked me. And he was the number 3 Entrepreneur of the Year in Australia. I bought the magazine. I went and slept in the car. I shoved the magazine in a box and I didn't pull it out till 10 years later. And what was interesting, or what I sort of learnt by looking at the front of that magazine, first of all, you've just got sacked by the number 3 Entrepreneur of the Year in Australia. Maybe he's right and maybe you're wrong. I never really considered that. But when I pulled that magazine out, I found it fascinating. He was the number 3 Entrepreneur of the Year in Australia that year. Number 2 that year was Alan Bond. And number 1 was Christopher Skase. So they were either dead or in prison. And that reminded me then that when we're in business, I think at times we treat the businesses too much like, I'll be happy when, or I'll be happy when I get this far, or when I make this much money, or when the apprentice stops giving me the shits, or when the kids are finished high school. Instead of treating it like, this is a journey, and the journey does get better if you continue to see out the time. The whole I'll be happy when never actually comes to you when you treat your business like an albatross around your neck. So I eventually got to Albury. I sat down, I was talking to my mother, and she said, what are you going to do? And I said, I don't know. And my mother was in her 50s, and she said to me, why is it that no one does home-delivered pizza in regional Australia? And I said, oh, you need a big factory, you need to be able to supply all these things, you need all these logistics. And she said, why? And I said, well, it's just the way it is. And she said, are you sure? Because you seem to know what you're doing with bakeries and factories and everything else. Maybe you should build a mini factory, like a bakery at the back and a pizza shop at the front. Maybe you should open up Australia's first regional home-delivered pizza shop. So 8 months later, after pitching my ideas to the banks and maxing out every credit card and sleeping on the garage floor at Mum's for nearly 5 months, we opened up Eagle Boys, and the first store was quite successful. It was at a time when not only we had very little competition, but drink driving laws had come in and a whole bunch of other things had changed. 6 months later, I went up the road and opened our second store in Wagga, and then our third store in Dubbo a few months after that. You've got 120 staff doing about 85 grand a week. They're all young. They're spread across 6 hours drive across Western New South Wales. What do you reckon is going to happen? Chaos and disaster. Systems weren't in place. I didn't understand how to manage people. Didn't understand we had to pay tax. That sucks. And a whole bunch of other things. You get phone calls at 6 or 8 o'clock at night, someone screaming down the phone saying your delivery driver just pulled up, delivered the pizzas, ran over the dog, stuff like that. People would ring up saying their daughters were pregnant. It was like, and that was in Dubbo. I wasn't even there that weekend. So all those kind of things were starting to fall apart. When we run a business, if you were to challenge yourself today that in 12 months you weren't going to be here, what would you go back and change and systemise and put into your staff to allow them to make the decisions if you weren't there? Because ultimately you want to be able to run a business and you say to them, what would you do if I wasn't here? And if you don't put the systems in place and the disciplines and the reasons for them to be able to run your business for you, you are the business. And if you're the business and you stop, the business stops. It's one of the greatest challenges you'll ever be given when running a business is the business you, or are you going to have it run itself without you? That way you'll have holidays, you'll have a life, you'll have fun, you'll have energy when you're still in your 50s. It's important. How are we going to do that with Eagle Boys? We decided to franchise it. And the first thing I said about franchising was I hated it because I'd seen it before. And my mother said to me, what is it that didn't work about franchising? And I said, the franchisor didn't take responsibility and da-da-da-da-da-da. And she said, I want you to take all of those things that you think made it fail and do the opposite. So we decided to change Eagle Boys completely overnight, and we went out of the pizza industry and into the people business. Our job was to coach, train, build and systemise the people that could use our brand. Now, there's a lot of crossroads happen to you in your life. I've had a few. The first one for me was our first franchisee. We were in Wagga, and they'd been training this guy up for 2 weeks. And everybody gets a bad apprentice or a bad employee that comes up and asks you stupid questions. He would come up and ask me a question, simple question about anything, and I'd say to him, mate, this is retail. Customer walks in the door, you look them in the eye, you smile at them, you ask them what they want, you tell them what you can give them, you smack them on the ass and you get them out fast. I just want you to take ownership. And he'd come up and ask another dumb question. I think the third day he said to me, oh, look, I was reading the operations manual the other night and there's nothing about bomb scares. And I said, well, there's 62 square metres, there's a door there and there's a door there. Work that one out. So I'm constantly bashing him in the ears. I just want you to take ownership. And you'll be quite surprised with people when you not only tell them to take ownership, but you give them the responsibility to take ownership. So every time he'd come and ask me about something, I'd say, take ownership, and he'd say, got it. It's midnight. He's buying the franchise the next day. It's our first store about to be sold. It's freezing cold, middle of winter. We couldn't even see our pizza delivery cars driving across the back of the Sturt Mall in the fog that night. And I step out the back with 2 bags of rubbish to take out to the dump master. And as I'm walking towards the dump master, a guy steps out from behind the bin and he's got a 12-gauge shotgun and he pokes it in my chest and says, step back in the store. He's dressed as Spider-Man and he's got a trench coat on. He ties the 3 of us up on the floor and then he goes over to the floor safe and he starts smashing the floor safe with his 12-gauge shotgun trying to get it open. He's getting very, very agitated. Then he walks over to the 3 of us and he holds the gun over us and I've got my arms behind my back like this. And he says, I need the combination of this safe. Which one of you guys is the store owner? And I looked up and I thought, oh, it's after 12 o'clock. So I looked across at this guy beside me who's about to become our first ever franchisee and I just gave him a look like this. I went, I thought it's a bloody good time for him to take ownership right then. Anyway, he didn't take ownership. I got up and I opened the safe. And interestingly, the next day, it was in the front page of the papers. Spider-Man robs Eagle Boys, armed robbery. Doesn't happen a lot in country towns. Graham bought the business and he had it franchised with us for at least 15 years. But what I found fascinating was we doubled in sales that week. People are pouring in the door and they're going, oh my God, I saw that thing about that armed robbery. Can't believe it happened. Didn't know you were here. Thought I'd give you a go. And I'm thinking, Jesus, lady, I've been here for 2 years. I've been advertising to you. And people weren't seeing me. And it was a massive realization. Our brand that we live and we breathe and we love, most people don't see it the way we see it. If you can see your brand through your customers' eyes, you've got half a chance of being able to give them what they want. Yeah, no book for you. So I decided from there on, I need to be on the other side of the counter. I'm going to be a salesperson, not an operations person all the time. So I've got a second trivia question for you. Whoever answers this question wins the best seller. You've been living with your mother for 2 years. You've been in 2 armed robberies. You work 7 days a week, 15 hours a day. You're from Victoria and you want to take a holiday. Where do you go? Who said Queensland? Lady at the back, yes, you're right, spot on. Because all Victorians, this is what we want to do. We aspire to come here and live in Queensland. It's true. Then we get up here and bitch and moan because we can't go to the MCG every week, but that's another story. So I come to Queensland on holidays and I go straight to Great Keppel Island. I'm up there for a couple of days. Everyone remember that advertising campaign, Great Place to Get Wrecked? Yeah, well, it was like that. So after a couple of days, I'm bored, so I decided to go across to Rockhampton and catch up with a mate of mine who's running the flour mill. Now, I'd never been to North Queensland, Central Queensland before, right? I'd never seen the language. I'd never seen the way they dressed and the way that they spoke and so forth. And this is how the conversation went. What are you up to, mate? I said, I'm doing home-delivered pizzas. He goes, home-delivered pizzas? And I said, yeah, we cook pizzas and do them. And he goes, no one does that here in Rocky, eh? And I said, what? And he goes, no, they don't, eh? And I said, what? So I get up the yellow pages and I call the first pizza shop. And the phone rings and rings and rings and the guy goes, Luigi's Pizza. I said, do you guys deliver? And he goes, no, we don't deliver, eh? Clunk, and hangs up. I ring the next one, and it ring, 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 and the guy says, Gino's Pizza, do you guys deliver? And he goes, no, we don't deliver, eh? Clunk, and hangs up. I'm thinking, this is pretty funny, right? So the next time the guy answers the phone, I said, do you guys deliver, eh? And he goes, no, eh? So after all that extensive market research, I go to Rockhampton and open our first Queensland pizza shop. And the first thing I thought is, why wouldn't they be doing home-delivered pizzas in Queensland or in central Queensland? We open up our first shop and it does double the sales of any of our shops in the south. Why do you think you sell more pizza in the summer than the winter or in the heat? Lady at the back's going to answer this for you, because no woman wants to cook in the heat. It's true. You get home and it's a 42-degree heat and he says, what's for dinner? And she goes, I don't give a shit. There's a beer, you work it out. But people in the cold stay inside and cook. It actually makes them warm and comfortable. We didn't like winters in Wagga. So Rockhampton's booming. I've seen a gold mine. It's called Central and Northern Queensland. We've got to get as many pizza shops as we can up there before anybody else discovers the opportunity. And I get a phone call from the franchisee who's freaking out on the phone, and I said, what's wrong? And he said, I think I'm going to go broke. Now he's doing nearly 40 grand a week in pizzas. And I said, what do you mean? He said, Pizza Hut, the world's largest and most successful pizza company, is about to start delivering. How can I compete with these guys? I said, mate, I just read a book on guerrilla marketing and guerrilla warfare, and I think I know how to beat these guys. And he said, well, how's that work? And I said, well, it's like the biggest guy on the rugby field running down the ground, because I had to convert it over to Queensland, and the littlest guy can take him by the ankles and he's out. We've got to do it differently. So I went up to Rocky the following week, and we're standing out the front of the shop, and here's all of our customers driving past at 4 o'clock in the afternoon. And I said, there it is. And he goes, what? And I said, there's our customers. Tradies, utes, mums, kids. On their way home, they're only thinking about one thing. What are they going to do for dinner? So we dressed up a 15-year-old kid in a bright pink eagle costume, and we stand him out on the side of the road for half an hour at 4 o'clock. There's my customer. There he is. And here's the message. Well, it's a huge hit. People are driving past. They're honking the horns, they're having accidents, kids are screaming. It's fantastic, right? Couldn't be better. I'm up there for 3 days, the kids dancing around. As I'm standing there behind the counter one night, guy pulls in the ute, he goes, mate, you got to get down the corner. And another guy pulls up and he says, down the corner. And I was thinking, what's the commotion? And I ran at the front of the shop. Now, Rocky was about 46 degrees that day, and the little kid in the eagle costume had been overcome by the heat. And he'd fallen over in the gutter, and all you could see was his two little feet sitting up like this. And we put him in the cold room, he was fine after about 10 minutes. But for us, it was about, there's my customer. I know what he wants, now I just got to tell him what I've got. The franchisee for Rockhampton, however, becomes a serial pest guerrilla marketer. I mean, this guy literally gets out of bed every day and comes up with a new way to get into his customers' faces and to get into his competition's faces. The greatest thing you can do with your competition is not let them know what you're doing, and not let them know your strategy. Not him. I get a phone call from the CEO of Pizza Hut. This guy's got a deep Texan accent. He starts screaming down the phone and bullying me on the phone, telling me there's an incident in Rockhampton on Thursday night and he's not going to stand for it. And I said, mate, give me a number, I'll call you back, because I don't know who this guy is. Now, I ring the guy in Rocky. You need a picture of him, right? He's 6'5", blonde hair, bull chest. He won't back off from anybody. Mate, how's business? He goes, fantastic, eh? And I said, how's sales? He goes, 10% up on last year, even though Pizza Hut's delivering. Had any problems up there? He said, none at all. I said, mate, I just got a phone call from the CEO of Pizza Hut. He said there was an incident up there on Thursday night. And there's dead silence on the other end of the phone. And he says, oh, there might have been one. I said, well, what happened? He said, well, I was dressed up in the eagle costume handing out menus in the Pizza Hut car park. So the Pizza Hut manager came out and told me to piss off, so I slapped him around. This is a 6'5" eagle, right? Anyway, as I'm slapping him around, the other Pizza Hut manager came out and got me by the tail and gave me a wedgie. I couldn't move. So I'm trying not to laugh. He doesn't leave it at that. He goes to the local newspaper and he says, I'm a local Australian-owned pizza company and I was brutally beaten in the streets of Rockhampton last Thursday night. They ring Pizza Hut. Of course, Pizza Hut says no comment because it's a big corporation. And the first thing he does is in the front page of the papers, there's a big photo of him. He's got his eagle costume. He's looking like this. And there's a big headline that says, Pizza Wars, little Aussie company beaten up by big American icon. Don't ever let the truth get in the way of good advertising and marketing. So the business was going to about 40 stores and I'd moved up here to Brisbane. In fact, my first offices were right here in Fortitude Valley. And Fortitude Valley was a different picture in the 90s, a very different picture. And within probably 2 years of moving to Brisbane, I'd borrowed a ton of money. We'd opened up a ton of stores. We were flying and a price war started. Does anybody remember the period where the pizzas went from $14 down to $6 and $7 inside a very short period of time? Can you imagine being in a business, or maybe you are at times, where some arsehole comes along and changes all the rules, undercuts you and sells shit at a lower price and the customers can't tell the difference? And you just want to go and kick them right where it hurts?
Who's heard of that insult?
This is the world we live in. This is the business we are in. And there are answers on how to deal with this. But for me, I was in the mid to late 90s. Huge American company came in and started slashing the prices all the way down to $6. Pizza Hut were the actual guys, and they ended up going from 460 stores to 200 stores. They crucified half of their franchisees doing a price war that they could never afford to do. So just because the competitors out there slashing price doesn't actually mean they know what they're doing. And it also doesn't mean you need to get down in the gutter with them. So I've got franchisees freaking out because the price wars have hit us hard. We don't know really what to do about it. And I get a phone call from the bank and they call me in and I discover over the next couple of days that I've been ripped off by over $600,000 by an internal employee who had a gambling problem and gone missing. So I was pretty much insolvent and I was completely and utterly screwed as to what I was going to do. Just as this was happening, I get a phone call from a guy who says, I'm the chief editor of the Australian Financial Review. And I thought, Jesus, these guys are quick, like they know. Really, I was right on the verge of bankruptcy. And he says, Tom, I wanted to be the first to congratulate that you've been nominated as Australian Young Business Person of the Year. Can you come to Sydney on Friday night? And I thought, I'll come down on Friday, I'll give it a crack. I probably won't go broke for 2 more weeks. But I went to Sydney and I won the award, and the award was to win a scholarship to go to Harvard Business School. And over the next 3 years, I went and spent a month a year doing my business degree. But for me, when I got back from my first semester, which was only 2 months later, nothing changes if nothing changes. Price war was still raging, franchisees were still freaking out, margins were getting smashed, and everybody was trying to be all things to all people. And if you haven't heard it before, I'm sure you'll hear it now. Trying to be all things to all people is like kissing your sister. It's nice, but it's not going to do a lot for you. So what we do is I get a call from a mate of mine who's a marketing guy, and he says, let's get out and have a look and see what's happening in the field. And we went out to a store, and it was a Friday night. And the first thing I saw when I walked in the store was a bunch of customers. And the first thing I thought was, wow, things are good. Maybe we're turning this around. And I walked in, and my mate was a marketing guy and a mathematics guy. And he said, you got a big problem here. And I said, what do you mean? He said, have a look at your customers. And I said, what do you mean? He goes, you've invited all the flies to the barbecue. He said, over here, these people are third generation unemployed. These guys over here, these are just bottom feeders. He said, I don't even know what they're ferals. And he goes, and in the middle of them all, there's a couple of little families that buy your stuff, but they're terrified by all the people you've invited in. He said, you've got a shop full of unprofitable customers. Has anybody ever heard that word, unprofitable customers? Who's got customers that take too long to make a decision, stuff you around, lowball you and don't pay you? You get rid of them. So as I'm standing there having this discussion about what's an unprofitable customer, a guy walks in the shop. He's got his hat on sideways. He's missing a couple of teeth. He's got the cigarettes here. He's got his pants hanging halfway down his ass, and he's got one thong on. And he looks straight at me. And I'm thinking, I better go serve this guy, because I'm a retailer. You don't ignore a customer. So as I'm walking towards him, I look up and down and I get transfixed on the thong. It's like cleavage. You shouldn't be there, but you are. You're stuck with it. Down and up, down and up. And you want to have a conversation. I said, mate, did you lose a thong? And he goes, no, I found one. And Bill says to me, we've got to go back and we're going to make a decision as to who our target market is, and we've got to treat them with great respect, and we've got to get rid of the bottom feeders and the people that are only chasing price, because they're disloyal and they're no good to us long term. And I got a bunch of people in the room just like this, and I said, guys, this is the market segment we want to own. We can't be all the way up here, and we certainly can't be all the way down here. This is where we're going to be famous. We put our prices back up, and we fixed up our service opportunity, and we repositioned our brand and said, that's what we're going to own. And this got us through it. But in the middle of this, my chairman sat me down and he said, I want to show you something that's important. And he put a big poster up on the wall. And this poster had a whole bunch of horses standing around in a paddock looking confused. And in the middle of these horses was a zebra. Now my chairman, who was the founder of Sizzler, said, do you know what that is? And I said, no, what is it? And he goes, mate, that's a zebra amongst horses. And I said, you're a freaking genius. And he goes, no, do you know what it actually means? And I said, what's it mean? And he goes, you've got to stand out like a zebra amongst horses. I want to know what you're going to be famous for in 5 years' time. He goes, at the moment, we've repositioned the brand and we've done this and we've done that, but he said, what are we really going to do to be famous? He goes, just because everybody's running down that road doesn't necessarily mean it's the right road. Sometimes you've got to zig while everybody else is zagging. And he challenged me. And he said, I want you to come up with one thing to be famous for. And what I did was I went back out and I looked through my customers' eyes and I started asking questions. 65% of all decisions made in our market are made by the woman in the family as to what they're going to eat. And most of that decision is based on safety. It's not just the flavour. What does the target market want and why do they want it? Well, here was my big discovery. The reason that drive-through coffee, chicken, burgers and everything else is so successful is not just because we're lazy. It's because it's safe. People will not get out of the car with kids and have them run across a car park. So we decided to go and build drive-throughs, and we decided to offer pizza in 2 minutes or it's free, because you can't be half pregnant. If you're going to make an offer, make it and follow through. And we opened our first drive-through in Emerald in Western Queensland. In fact, we had to build that drive-through about 1.5 foot wider than all the others because of all the tradies, trucks and utes and all the damage they did when we first built it. And I remember going up there and working in the drive-through, and our sales in our original shop were $1 million a year. We shut that shop. We moved it 300 metres up the road. We built a drive-through. We didn't change our price, and we doubled our sales inside 3 months. You don't change your price. You don't change your value proposition. You just change what you're doing for the customer. what you're doing for the customer. Now, there was another discovery that I realised when I was looking and building these drive-throughs, is that when mum decides on a Friday night she's got to go down and pick up the food because the old man's had too much to drink, she doesn't really go to a lot of effort when she gets in the car to go and pick up the food, because you don't have to put the lipstick on and take off the passion killers to walk in the shop. So people are driving through this drive-through in Emerald, and I'm working at the window passing the pizzas out the window, and I can tell you it's not a pretty sight in a lot of cases. So we started building these drive-throughs all around Australia and offering pizza in 2 minutes. And inside 2 years, 65% of our business was through our 2-minute option. We finally realised what we needed to do to be famous and stand out like a zebra amongst horses. In a lot of businesses, and I was talking to the guys about this when I got the briefing, I don't understand your business. I never will. I was quite surprised to find out how big it is, but I wasn't surprised to find out that you've got a whole bunch of bottom feeders. You've got a whole bunch of people selling shit from offshore and selling products that people have a misperception about. This is nothing new. In every industry, you will see it. The question is what you've got to do to stand out and work out what your value proposition is to keep those customers happy. I said earlier about the concept of looking through your customer's eyes, and it's an interesting one. Has anybody ever heard the saying, "Do unto others as you would have them do unto you"? Everyone heard that? Has anybody here read the Bible? Do unto others as you would have them do unto you. Yeah, it's the biggest load of bullshit that's ever been written or said. I actually tried this at home, right? I thought I'll set up for my missus exactly like I'd like to be treated. Got the TV set up, got the AFL on Friday night, organised a couple of nice big greasy pizzas, some cold VBs. I can tell you it didn't go down well at all, because you don't do unto others as they would do unto you. You do unto others as they would like to be done unto. If you're in selling, sit across the table and ask the customer what they want. And then ask them, what is it that you need from me to get this business, to do the deal? Customers will want 10 things, but only 2 matter. They will want 10 things, but only 2 matter. And you can also try this out with your wife as well, because I did. I said, and she goes, well, I want you to be a good husband, I want you to cook, I want you to be good to the kids, stop adjusting yourself in public, stuff like that. But then I say, what are the 2 things that matter? And she says, well, if you do that and that, I'll put up with all your other filthy habits. And it's true. So find out what those 2 things are that the customer wants to get the sale. And ask them, what is it that you want from us that it gets this over the line? And by the way, like I said earlier, if these people are in a situation where they make you unprofitable, sometimes the strongest word in your vocab is no. No, that's not how we do business. That's not our value proposition. And let it go. Move on. We've got some time for some questions, but I'm just going to close off on one story. Most of you are aware I sold Eagle Boys pre-2010. And the business was doing about 190 million in sales, and we had 4,500 employees, and we were across 4 countries. And it was time for me to step down and sell the business, and I sold it to a venture capital group who were using Queensland superannuation funds, and it was a management buyout, and over the next 10 years the business disintegrated and it was gone. And there were multiple reasons why, but the main reason for me was they went away from their values of what they stood for as a business, and it was all over. I did a few years of retirement, did a few years as directorship on certain boards, and now I'm back in business, and we've got bakeries, and we have a new brand called Galactic Donuts, and we've got about 10 stores around Queensland. And the business now, for me, when I sat down with my blank piece of paper and looked at Galactic Donuts, had to be, what is our long-term sustainable point of difference? What's going to make us stand out like a zebra amongst horses. So my closing story today, it's about a kid, and he's 16 years of age, he's in a small country town, and he's in sales, and he's selling vacuum cleaners. And I don't care who you are or what you do, most days, most people, as to what they do, they're in sales. The sales we had to go up in the morning. I was in Queenslander today, and our donut shop's working up there. Shit, I'm in sales when I go to bed at night. We're all in sales. So this kid's selling vacuum cleaners door to door, and he's in a small country town. It's a cold morning, steam's coming up off the paddocks. As he's walking down the road, he's got his vacuum cleaner, he's full of enthusiasm, and he sees a big sign up and it says, housing estate. And he thinks, housing estate, new homes, new carpets, vacuum cleaners, perfect place to start. And as he's walking up the road, he sees all these new homes that have been built on the right-hand side of the housing estate, but on the left-hand side, it's a cow paddock. Now, most people aren't going to see that cow paddock as any opportunity. Not this kid. He sees massive opportunity in the cow paddock. He jumps the fence. He grabs a 20-litre chaff bucket. He fills it up with much of that warm, steaming, green, filthy cow shit he can get his hands on. Now he's got a bucket of opportunity. He walks up to the first door and he knocks on the door, and a beautiful young woman answers the door. And he goes, stand back, lady. And he grabs this big bucket of warm, steaming cow shit and he goes, woof, and he throws it all the way up the passageway on the new carpet. Now he's excited. And he says, lady, if this vacuum cleaner doesn't pick up that shit, I'm going to eat it. And she goes, I'm going to get your knife and fork. We haven't got electricity on yet. And I just like using that story because sometimes you've got to do what you've got to do to get the job done. Anyway, thanks for your patience today. I know it's been a long day. Thank you.
Thank you. Does anyone have any questions? It's not about cow shit, is it?
I was going to say, what time's the bar open?
Thanks, Tom. That was excellent. I'm curious as to what made you come out of retirement. Did you need to, or did you just have that drive where you wanted to get stuck?
Do you mean did I have financial problems?
No, well, I was going to put it in those words. I mean, did you get restless and want to build something again?
Yeah, it's actually it's a very good question. After 10 years of being in semi-retirement, I actually got sick of not working for myself. I went on to a couple of boards. I found most of the boards in Australia are run by criminals and idiots, and I just couldn't be there anymore. So I decided I need to go back and work for myself. So, yeah, one of the reasons I sold Eagle Boys was I was the sole operator, and it became so big that the banks were all over me, and I was getting a lot of pressure as to what was the next step, and are we going to take it public, and how do you minimise risk? And it was just really, really difficult when it became that big. So, yeah, for me, I sort of enjoyed retirement for a few years, but then after that I was like, you know, I get out of bed every day, I bounce out of bed because I really enjoy what I'm doing, and I think I'm never going to retire again, I'll tell you now. I might semi-retire, but I'm never going to retire again. And I was 43 when I did it. It was young. I mean, I didn't have my first kid till I was 45. All my mates are laughing their asses off now. Yes, mate.
With Galactic Donuts, with it being your second time around of doing it, well, you probably claim to be a big franchise. Are you able to get out of it quicker from your previous experiences, or are you very hands-on still with the donut store?
So you're asking, did the business have quicker momentum?
Oh, like, are you out of the donut businesses in the day-to-day? Are you able to get yourself out of it quicker, or are you still in it?
It's a good question, because the way I planned it initially was to be hands-on initially, learn what I've got to learn, step off. Because at some stage in your life and in your business, you have to go from being a player to a coach, right? You've got to go from being you can't play for the rest of your life. At some stage, you've got to become a coach, or as a minimum, a playing coach. And that was what I put the structure together. Every one of our stores is half owned. So I've got partners that run them all. We're all very clear on where we stand. So, you know, I made the point earlier about where would you be in a year, or where would your business be in a year if you weren't here? But if you started planning it today, that you weren't going to be here in a year, and you're still going to be here, the business can run itself, or almost run itself. Yes?
Yeah, Tom, can you just tell me, how do you make a pizza in 2 minutes? And how do you come up with that measure?
Look, it's all in the book, and you can have it for $29.95 cash, no receipts.
I've got a question for you, Tom. One of the problems that people face in this industry all the time as a business owner is that it's very rapidly changing, there's a lot of government regulations. And I don't know how that compares with the pizza industry or other industries. But did you ever go through a stage in that whole journey where you just thought, this shit is too hard to compete with?
You know,
too difficult?
There's an alternative to saying it's all too hard. It's failure. And for me, I've never ever considered it. It was always going to be, what are we going to do to fix it, turn it around, make it work? I have at times said a few choice words and got in trouble for doing certain things. And you'll love this story. In Toowoomba, a month ago, we opened up 2 donut shops. People lined up around the block. Somewhere on our website, it said that we were selling $2 M&M donuts in our other shops because we were running a promotion up there. So we made a mistake. Somebody comes in and says, oh, you've got a $2 M&M promotion going on in your other shops. And we said, oh yeah, no worries, because we weren't running it in Toowoomba. We said, sure, here's your M&M donuts for $2. This arsehole goes and reports us, and Liquor and Gaming turn up the next day to Fun Police, 2 Nazis. They walk in and they say, we're here to talk to you about your M&M donuts, you're not selling them for $2, and you've been reported, and we're from the government, Liquor and Gaming. And I'm just standing there looking at these people. And I said, you fucking shit me, aren't you? And they literally are standing there going, no, you've got to report, you've got to stand for this. So the way the world's going, it's becoming more and more built the way of these do-gooders and so on and so forth. The question is, if you can do it better than everybody else, you'll beat everybody else. So yeah, it's the game the way it is. It's not going to change. Sorry, there's another question from the back, I think.
Is it a franchise model, the donuts, or a job to do manage stores and business?
No, it's not a franchise model. Every store's half owned. We don't use the F word in our business anymore. Yeah. I've decided our business for franchising, I've done it once, and there's a whole bunch of lessons you learn along the life. Someone said to me recently, oh, what's the guide to ultimate wealth? And I said, marry your second wife first. There's a whole bunch of things. But I will also say that for those of us that are in business, you got to remind yourself too that you're the 0.01% of this country. We're the employers, we're the guys that actually get out of bed and take all the risks and everything else. Nobody else cares, right? So stop thinking about how your employees care about you and everything else. They care about themselves, that's understandable, and there's loyalty that you'll build from there as well. But forgive yourself for your mistakes. Because if you dwell on them, other people haven't really given a second thought to the mistakes you've made either. I went to college with a guy in the US who is Rupert Murdoch's right-hand man, and we're best friends. And he calls Rupert the king of screw-ups. And I said to him, what's the difference? And he goes, Rupert doesn't give a shit. He just moves on. He goes, whether it's businesses or wives, he just moves on. He forgives himself. And he does. So, if you made a few blues along the way, join the queue and forgive yourself for those. Is there another question? Yes?
A bit left field. You talked about the drive-through in your first business, why that was innovative. With the donuts, this is left field again. Palm oil is something some people think about. Do you go all the way back to your supply chains and think about it, like our supply chain is starting to become an issue with lithium, etc. Is that something we should all be thinking about? Like further back than the box that arrives at our store or in your store?
So a guy walks into the shop recently. He's a mammal, middle-aged man in lycra. You know, one of those guys that rides those bikes? He walks in and he goes, "What do you got here that's healthy?" And I said, "Nothing, you've got to go to the fruit shop next door." I actually think in a lot of cases, the consumer, and I can't talk on your business, but the consumer isn't that consumed as to where something comes from or how environmentally friendly it is. It may be what you're actually supplying to them as far as the service, the technology, or anything else. So for us, I am not in the healthy food business. Our website even says vegans and celiacs not welcome. They're not. We can't help them because we can't be all things to all people. We can be a really good supplier of products that are full of sugar and gluten, and it's not really healthy for you. There's no doubt about it. I remember doing a discussion on pizza years ago, and a lady at the back stands up and she goes, "When are you going to sell healthy pizzas?" And I said, "Never." And that was it. That was the end of the conversation. Because that's where you're at. I'm not sure I've answered your question, but yeah, for me, I mean, palm oil, we don't use it, but would the customer walk in and say, "Do you use palm oil or canola?" They don't ask. I don't care. They go, "Just give me that one with cream and custard and all the other shit in it." Oh, I'll tell you a funny story about New Zealand. When we opened up in New Zealand, we had about 80 shops over there. And I always used to work behind the counters, see what was going on. And I was in Invercargill. Has anyone ever been to Invercargill? Yeah, you got out all right? Anyway, working behind the counter, and this massive Maori walks in. And unless you've seen them up close with all the tattoos on their face, it's incredible. And the work that's gone in and everything else. And this guy walks up to the counter and he's massive. And I go to serve him. And he looks down at me and he goes, "How's it going, bro?" And I said, "Pretty good." And he goes, "I'll have a spicy chicken apricot sauce. I'll have a meat lovers with double meat and barbecue sauce. I'll have a super supreme with extra anchovies. I want an almond pineapple, 4 garlic breads and a Diet Coke." So I'm writing the whole order down. I'm not saying shit. And then his wife walks in and she's twice the size of him. And he goes, "What are you going to have?" That's a true story. And you've got to hold a straight face. Any other questions? I believe you guys have had a pretty long day, so again, I'll thank you so much and good luck with it in the future.